Okay. Is my screen visible?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So hi guys, welcome to this workshop on how to construct caselines and economics motions. We don't have a very large audience, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep this as interactive as possible. I want to know your thoughts and your experiences on debating economics motions, as in when I go about the things that I've thought of. I don't have a presentation for you, so we're going to just do it on this document here. We're going to go in the flow of understanding what case lines is first, then understanding sort of differences between economics and finance motions, and then we'll go into just how to construct those case lines. If you guys have any questions at any point of the this workshop, you can just unmute yourself and ask me. There's like I said, this is not a big audience, so you can just uh, raise your hands, or maybe even just just unmute yourself. It's completely all right. It's not an issue. Okay, someone has their hands raised already. You have a question?
Sir, uh, during the debate, will we allowed to use our computers while making the speech?
Um, yeah, in debating, you can use your computers, but it depends on tournament policies sometimes. Some tournaments do not allow you to use computers, so you have to get special permissions from a dedicated team, which is called the equity team, to get access to your computers. But I think it's a great practice for people to learn how to do debating on paper. That's the usual way you go about it. So
Okay, thank you.
yeah. Okay. Uh, cool. Let's start by first discussing what a case line is. Sorry, my laptop's acting up a bit. Okay, so what's a case line? A case line is just you making a more structured approach to argumentation. So it looks like a problem solution statement. Um, and the reason why we do this in a problem solution statement way is for two things. The first is to make your case, make your prep time more efficient. Um, and second is so that the judges can track you better, right? The reason why I say judges also need to track you better and why this is an important consideration is because most often than not, things like economics and finance usually end up confusing a lot of people, and this has a lot of technical jargons and concepts that are not immediately clear to most individuals. Not everyone's doing an economics degree. You know basic stuff about economics, but it's not you don't know the complicated bits, right? The kind of theories or the kind of economic models that go on, and those things can get really confusing for any average person as well. And if you feel you're confused in when it comes to debating economics motions, the judges are also equally confused and confused while judging the economic motions. So it's important to make your case line in the most structured way possible, almost like a story, like a narrative that you're building. The reason why this will help you is that because judges can also now easily track where you're beginning and where you're ending. Of course, you can drop in a lot of arguments as a debater, because you just know something about the topic, or you just things in prep time. But those arguments and those things that you want to say don't really impact the way they should impact a judge in terms of persuasion if you don't make them structured. And that's why case line in of itself is a concept that everyone should learn, irrespective of what motion you apply and irrespective of what kind of theme you apply it in, whether it's economics, whether it's IR, whether it's history, or any sort of debate that you'll do ever in your life. It's important to make things structured. The way as the reason why I say the reason why I'm saying structured is the reason that we just highlighted right now. And how do you structure an argument? And let's get into the practical steps. The simple way to do this is just to first highlight the problem you want to solve. Second is to identify the solution from the motion statement, right? Um, so so let me give you an example, which is that if there's a motion about this house as a developing country will start a universal basic income. Universal basic income means everyone, irrespective of where they come from, get some portion of money from the government as a monthly salary, sort of, even if you're not working. So that's what universal basic income means. So if the motion is about this, how the developing countries will start or implement a UBI program, then the problem statement you want to solve is that people don't have money, people are do not have the ability. Most poor individuals don't have the ability to put food on their table, and those things, and things like affording education and healthcare can get very tough. And in order to solve that, you want to go ahead and start the basic income for most of the, for a lot of these individuals. So you take the problem statement that you can think of what a developing country looks like, what are the issues that developing countries face, and then you can go to the solution statement, which is derived from the motion, that in order to solve the problem of resource crunch that homes have or poor individuals have, we're going to give them more income, and that's going to solve their problems. So that's how you do a problem statement and a solution statement after. But there are other steps to this which are also equally crucial, that make it a debate argument as opposed to just like a justification of the motion statement, right? So in order to make a debate argument, you have to talk about three additional things after you've done the problem and the solution statement. You talk about the mechanism. The mechanism deals with the how of how this works, which means that how are you going to allocate this money, where is the government going to get the funding from, and how will people basically use this money when they get this basic income. So those are the key burdens that you have to now answer in the debate for your mechanism of saying that we'll give money to basic income to everyone works, right? So you have to explain why the mechanism works, how it works. So you have to give a model here. You have to also explain why people will use this in a good way, why people will not misuse this money, and while they'll use it in more productive things, right? Because if you give some money to an individual, they can use it in negative things also. They can gamble this money away. They can use it in buying alcohol, which is not a good thing, because obviously, if you want economic development of the country, you want people to invest in themselves in things like education or healthcare, so that they can grow as an individual and they can get access things like jobs and opportunities, which can help the economy grow as a whole. So you want to ensure that you do those mechanisms here. We explain why people use this money well, why governments allocate this money in a good way, why they don't misappropriate those funds and stuff like that. Those are the mechanisms you have to fit into the third part here. Yes, someone has a question. Go ahead.
Sir, relating to British parliamentary debate, would a case line only be for opening?
Yes and no, because I think when it comes to 3v3s and the opening half of a BP debating, it's usually similar, right? Like it's you have the prime minister, the deputy prime minister, like two speeches are similarly copied from a 3v3 format. So in those things, yes, you have to do the same approach to case lines and setups. And I think it's important that even closing teams go ahead and do things like a structured approach to case line. The reason why I say this is because at closings the debate can get even more confusing when they add new elements to the debate. So it's I think it's even more important for closings team to make this a structured argument. The reason why I say no is because in some cases, in some debates, depending on the room that you're in, it's less about doing all the steps of the motion or all the step of an argument, but rather just strategically picking the step that your opening has missed out on, right? So for example, if like an opening team or opening government says that this is a problem you want to solve and this is how you solve this problem, if they have not given the mechanism now on how the problem gets solved, closing doesn't have to do the same problem and solution statement, right? They already have it from their opening, so they can say that we're going to explain why this mechanism is the reason why this solution can work for the given problem that opening government has talked about. So what you do is that you fit in a particular part of the jigsaw puzzle that opening has not solved, which means you don't have to do the entire structure. You can just pick the part which opening has missed out. And that, I think, it's more about then about how you approach strategy in British parliamentary debating as opposed to you approaching the case construction as a whole, right? So strategically placing your extension, strategically taking away the material from your closing, or strategically covering the bits that you feel the closing can extend on is important to do as an opening. All those things do factor in quite heavily when you're doing British parliament debates, which do not factor in as much when I do 3v3s. In 3v3s, you are just like facing one team. There's no one extending over you, or there's no closing team on you. So you just have to engage with that team across, and which means that you can do the structured approach while engaging with them in 3v3 specifically. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Okay. So now there's a mechanism like I talked about. The fourth part to this is impacting, which talks about what happens next, right? So this is just impacting of what happens when people use this money, how they use this money, what impact it brings to them. They can send a child to education, they can buy healthcare, they don't they can build things like savings, they can do investments. Those kind of things are impacting that you have to also flesh out after you've done the mechanism bit. And lastly, this is like not the most important thing, or does not have to do it explicitly, but in debates that become quite close, it's important to also weigh your arguments by explaining why this argument matters more than any sort of other argument the team is going to give you. So weighing is just it says why more important, right? So the reason why I say this is because some debates can also get have a lot of parallelism. What this means is that if you are saying that we want people to get money, opposition will say that instead of giving people money, we can invest in things like economic growth, which for the long term, so governments can subsidize things like education over time instead of doing basic income. But then you have to weigh out, right, why giving people money right now is more important than you building things like education institutions or hospitals. So you can do a short-term, long-term weighing here, where we can say that people get money right now on side government and so on side opposition. Even if you build hospitals, it will take some time to build those hospitals, and the returns of the hospitals are going to take even more time, right? So it's important that we take people out of poverty right now because it's the more immediate proximate need that people feel. So that's how you can do a short-term, long-term weighing when there's a like a counter case on the other side. Yes, you have a question, Jiansh.
Yeah, so one more thing the opposition can say is that if you give money to people right now, they will stop working. They will think that if we're getting money, then why should we go ahead and work?
Yeah. That's what opposition can also say. There are a lot of things, right? And this is exactly why you have to. When I talked about the mechanism bit, to explain here why people will not use this money in a bad way, and secondly, why people will also not stop working, or maybe people will still want to continue saving more and more. And you can also explain that even if some people stop working, there are a lot of people who are unemployed, right? Who do not have any form of revenue or salary that they can get in their households. So maybe the people who are currently working, who are currently employed, stop working. But the trade off is justified because a larger number of people are unemployed and they need some money because they will basically die of hunger if they do not get this money. Right. So they want to work, but they don't have the opportunities in the market for them to work. So those people that then become more important. And that's also how you weigh your impact against other sides push about saying that you will stop working. So yes, this is a very valid claim counter opposition that some people stop working, but then it's on you as side government to explain why the benefit outweighs the harm that the other side is pushing on you. So that's how you do like just a case line in and of itself, right? So I hope that's clear. Let's talk about next of difference between eco and finance, because it's quite confusing. So I think there's obviously some sort of marriage between the two. There is some overlap that happens, but I think broadly there's a few differences that you should consider while debating economics motions that will help you just stay on track with what the debate has asked you to do. So the first difference is just like economics is more broad. It talks about things like government policies. It talks about how you can allocate certain resources, which can range from not just financial, but also resources like land, resources like uh, labor, things like technology. So all those kind of things are something that you can also allocate over time. The next thing is that and finance, on the other hand, focuses on specifically money and things like investments and how risk is like moves around within the banking system. So finance usually focuses on more uh, micro micro level movement of money, uh, and this is very specific to how resources, specifically like monetary resources, are allocated as opposed to other resources like land and technology and labor are also allocated. So economics is mostly a broader concept, and that also makes it easier to debate and understand. Finance is usually more micro or a niche level concept. It makes it more difficult to understand because economics has like impacts around you. um, you can see these things like policies. You can see things like how GDP of the country is growing. You can talk about how government is getting in more FDI. Those kind of things are something that you can read about, you can learn about just by reading a newspaper. Finance, on the other hand, is gets a bit confusing because finance has a lot of technicalities. So you can talk. There are a lot of things like equity or like private capital, venture capitalists, hedge funds, vulture funds. There are a lot of things that finance has. There's a lot of technical jargon around it. What this means is that it can get quite confusing if you do not know the niche level of knowledge that is required to debate finance motions. So this has some overlap, like I said, in terms of how this also talks about money, that also talks about money, but the way or the lens of viewing gets quite different. So economics is easier to understand, like I said, and finance is a lot more difficult to understand as a consequence. So there are the two broad differences that you should know and you should be careful about. The reason why I say you should be careful about this is because often you'll see yourself trying to debate finance or trying to get into things like explaining how banking works or things like loans work when you really just have to debate economics. So just be careful about the overlap and where things can get a little confusing. Now let's talk about how to construct this case line, because I think that's what this like largely this workshop is about, right? So the first thing is that first you need to identify. What do you need to identify? The first thing you need to identify is um yeah, sorry. The first thing you have to identify is what kind of economic model are we dealing with. So there are multiple types of economics models. The first is called a market-based model, which is when companies a free market takes over, which means that companies go ahead and create things like demand and supply, and they fulfill those things as a consequence. Second is called state intervention, wherein the governments go and intervene by directly funding a particular company or making an economic policy that changes the way the GDP functions or economic activity in the country goes ahead and changes. The third is just redistribution. And the last can be uh, things like growth and equities. No, not growth and equity. Yeah, growth and okay. We'll just leave it at growth. Cool. So this is the kind of economic model you first have to identify or what the debate is asking you to do. So I'm going to give you a bunch of motions here, and I want everyone to like just tell me where do you think this motion fits in these four sort of broad categories that we have determined, right? So let's talk about the motion that we were just discussing. That the states should developing countries should enforce a model of universal basic income. Anyone can answer, like, where do you think this motion fits? In what category? No one? Yes, Ayan, go ahead.
Redistribution.
Okay, that's great. Yes, it does fit in redistribution. The second we can talk about is that this house, as India, will privatize national champions. So national champions are companies that are private sector undertakings, the PSUs. So the debate talks about why you should privatize those PSUs as opposed to holding it within the government. Jihansh, yes, go ahead.
Actually, I had a question for the first
Mhm.
one. Would the
Mhm.
first one also be state intervention because, like, the government is
Yes.
giving money?
Yes. It will also be state intervention. Yes, you're
Okay.
correct. So like these are categories that are not like directly defined, right? A lot of these are sort of interlinked, like I explained earlier, because when you have things like market-based solutions, that also dictates how the state should intervene or should not intervene. Similarly, when you have state intervention, the state intervention can look like things like redistribution directly. And when you redistribute, you can also have growth. So you can have a lot of these things at the same time, but it's just important to know what boxes the motion fits in, so it's easier for you to target the case line and approach how you want to start the motion construction. That's the like larger idea of this exercise. Yeah, so the second thing we were talking about was sorry, what was the motion that I just thought of? I forgot, I think. um yes, does someone remember? Sorry, never mind. So yeah, like, let's go to the next motion then. The motion that I was thinking of
Ye-
was that
uh, I
yes.
remember. I remember. You had said that the government should privatize
Yes, national champions.
company. Yes.
Yes. They should prioritize PSUs. Where do you think this motion fits in then? Yes, Ayan, go ahead.
State intervention.
Okay, great. And second, is there any other box it goes and fits in also?
It might go to market based.
Yes, correct. Because now if you're privatizing these things, then obviously private companies will take over and and that will be like a sort of free market over that particular industry where the PSU was linked. So, which means that they can determine how demand supply works, kind of innovation that works in those companies and all those kind of things. So that's how you determine whether you want to place this particular economic model, right? The second thing is just talking about the stakeholders. So the first thing on stakeholders is obviously the people who get impacted. Second can be governments and how they are impacted. Third can be companies and how they are impacted, right? So these are the three broad categories. This is also called the three sector model that exists within economics, which is that what how, the number of so just to give you a simple example, if government gives a tax subsidy to a company and they allow the company to like get more profit, the companies can go ahead and have a larger amount of money left with them. They can use this money to hire more people. The people then means get a larger amount of pay, more people get a lot of salary, and those salaries now used to go ahead and give taxes back to the government, and the salary can also be used to buy more goods from other companies, right? So it's like interconnected. The entire economic model, like economic activity of a country is largely interlinked in a particular manner, and these are like the three primary stakeholders that exist within the three sector model. There's also like a four sector model and also like a more complicated five sector model. In the four sector model, I'm just going to like quickly touch upon this. There are things called international actors, which means things like IMF or World Bank or even other countries that go and engage with a particular country to when it comes to economic activity. So things like trade, things like FDI, all those things, or like just giving loans to a country as IMF or World Bank, also play a huge role in determining who the stakeholder of this debate is, right? The second thing, the last thing we want to talk about is what are the trade-offs you have to make in such debates. So what do you think are the larger trade-offs that you see when it comes to economics motion specifically? uh, I'm sure you guys have done some motions of economics. We just discussed two or three of those. So what do you think are the trade-offs that teams have to basically do? And the reason why I ask this is because most of these trade-offs are going to be cross applicable across most of the types of economics motion that you're going to come across in a debating journey. So Ayan, yeah, go ahead. What's like the first trade-off that you think exists?
Okay, so the first trade-off I think of when I think of the first one of the universal basic income is giving up trickle down economics. So you're going to trade off trickle down economics. So what will be trickle up economics? You're going to trade that off. Then you're going to have to trade off how private the market is. So you're going to trade off freedom of the market. So because government is intervening, I think you may. I was thinking of one other thing you have to trade off, but I forgot.
Okay, that's good. So the first thing you mentioned was about trickle down economics, but trickle down economics is like an argument within the trade-off, right? The question was about what are the two things you're trading off between. I think the second answer that you gave is more precise, I feel, because that title talks about how government intervention should happen in a particular way versus what the free market should dictate. So the trade-off here can just look like state resources versus efficiency of the market. Yes, you have a follow-up, Anne?
I just remembered what my other one was.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're going to trade off the fact that you'll have to accept that there will always be bad actors in the system.
Okay, that's going to be true for all economic models, right? It's
I know,
not
but for this
specific.
one in particular, you're going to accept that there's going to be a bad actor. Someone will try to misuse this.
Yeah, that's true. So then in that case, you have to again talk about things like short term versus long term, because some people have short term benefits to this. Uh, some people might use it, but the short term benefits will outweigh the possible harms of long term misuse. So you can talk about those things as well. So maybe, yeah, short term versus long term. Anything else? Yes, Jihansh.
I had a little confusion as to what trade-offs are.
So trade-offs usually are trade-offs just by how it's defined means that you are okay with accepting some harm or some loss for a potential benefit that you feel is bigger. So either you can be on the winning side of a trade-off or you can be on the losing side of a trade-off, right? So if you're on the winning side of a trade-off, you can say that we agree that there are some harms that are going to exist because of this policy, but the benefits are more important, and that's why we're okay trading off this harm, because this is XYZ reason for why we're okay with this harm getting traded off. So trade-off is like not everything will have a perfect sort of implementation. Not every policy is going to be completely beneficial for everyone. You'll obviously have trade-offs in some way or the other, which means that they're going to incur some losses, incur some harm as a consequence of this policy, because no policy is perfect. That the decision-making calculus is called a trade-off, or you determining what is more important for the country. So if you say that we're going to reduce the amount of taxes that we take from people, yes, it will have a lot of benefits for people because they don't have to pay a lot of tax, which means they can save the tax and spend on themselves, spend it on their households and stuff like that. But what it also means that it comes a trade-off of government having less money to collect, right? Because governments rely a lot on taxation. So when they have lesser money to collect, they can't make things like welfare policies for the poor, or they can't help you build roads and stuff. So you have to just then determine what is more important for the government, what is more important for the economic activity, what is more important for the any of the stakeholder that you want to identify in the debate, and that's how you make a trade-off on a particular stakeholder, on a particular idea. Yes, you have a question?
No, just like another answer for the trade-off. I suppose it could also be just things like innovation and accessibility, especially when you talk about nationalization versus privatization.
Yeah, precisely. So we can talk about innovation versus perhaps stability, because if you have privatized PSUs, then they will obviously innovate a lot, but they can't guarantee you the same amount of like job stability that like a government PSU does, because governments have to keep on funding private sector under or like public sector undertakings, irrespective of whether they're loss making or profit making, because these are nationally important things. So things like oil or electricity or water are important things for the government. They have to ensure that people get this even if the company keeps on making losses. Private sector, on the other hand, might give you new innovation techniques, but they will not. But as soon as they start hitting losses, they're going to cut their losses. They're going to reduce the amount of staff. They're going to take away quality of production and all those things. Which means that for stability, it's not a great thing. It's great for innovation, but governments are better for stability. So yeah, innovation or stability is also a trade-off that you can possibly have in most debates. That's very good. Yes, Ayan, you have a question?
Yeah, my question is, do we have to bite the bullet?
Yes, in all debates, it's strategically very important that you bite the bullet. It's very important that you also make those trade-offs, because only then you can truly engage with the other side's case, right? If you say that my policy is perfect and it cannot, like, there's no harm to this policy at all, and the other side gives you a bunch of harms, and none of you is willing to bite the bullet and make a trade-off, then you're just running two parallel cases. Then it just comes down to what the judge feels, and the judge thinks that, oh, probably the benefits are better or more persuasive, or they have given more analysis for these benefits, and that's why I should give it to them. But that's a toss up, right? That can go either way. Maybe the other side analyze the harms better than you, but your harms or your benefits are actually very strong. It's just that you have not done enough to analyze them, perhaps. Then what becomes the clincher for you, even in such a scenario, is that if you have made a trade-off, then you're already engaging with their best case scenario, even if they have done more mechanisms, even if they have more analysis. And that means you can still win the debate, even if you are not as strong analytically in an argument. But if you just don't make the trade-off and neither team does it, then the judges have to rely on their own intuition and their own ability to get persuaded by a particular idea for them to just a debate on, which is quite tricky, and it's really dependent on the judge's subjective interpretation. And you should not allow judges to have that kind of freedom, I would say. I think it's important for you to ensure that you're winning the debate, as opposed to leaving it in the judge's hands and praying to God that you'll win or not. So yeah, it's very important to bite the bullet. It's very important to make trade-offs.
Sir, to say the debate topic is, this house regrets the rise of privatization. Okay. Do we have to, like, would we have to bite the bullet? Would we have to say like privatization is bad completely? Or could we say that we regret the rise of privatization, not because privatization is bad, but because of the way it is carried out?
Yeah,
Would
I
that
think
simply bite the bullet? The second,
Yeah,
what the second
that
part is
I
regarding?
think there are two parts to this debate, and the first part specifically is not about. So I think the most strategic approach in this debate would be to say that we don't regret privatization as a whole. We regret the rise of privatization because the rise has happened in a bad way. Because the motion says the rise, right? So
Yeah.
you have to regret the rise. You don't have to regret privatization. If the motion was this how to regret privatization, then you would regret the entire thing as a whole. So yes, you will in this you play it more strategically, but in an instance where the other side is also pushing back against you and saying that, oh, without the rise, privatization would just die out, it will not even exist, which means that side government cannot claim that they will have some level of privatization, but they will not have a rise of privatization. So if they're pushing this uncharitable burden on you, it's okay if you take the burden and say that, okay, maybe it's privatization as a whole is bad, but that's just for engagement purposes. That should not be your first line of strategy, right? Your first line of
Okay.
strategy should always be that we talk about the motion at hand as opposed to taking a very high burden that's quite difficult to prove.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, cool. Arjun, you have a question?
Yeah. So, do we debate purely on the economic impact of a topic or of a motion, or can we bring an ethical or social standpoint into it as well?
Definitely. I think debating can be, or most arguments can be viewed in through multiple lenses, and it's important to diversify those lenses. I think it's rather crucial, I would say, to diversify those lenses, because if you just debate on economics and the other side is able to explain that the social harm of these things can outweigh the benefits, then if someone says that, for example, that if you give UBI to everyone and people start using these things to, I don't know, buy drugs or buy alcohol, and that can lead to social menace, it will lead to increase in things like crime, and they're able to explain why this or this, even if this happens for a small number of people, this harm is so massive in nature that it outweighs the possible benefits that side government wants to claim in terms of allowing people the money to run their houses. If they're able to do this, then obviously and you don't get, like, counterweigh this particular thing, then it becomes easier for judges to also buy this claim, because it's quite intuitive to say that the crime is like the worst thing that can happen, right? Because these people will commit crimes and make victims of other individuals, so which means that the crime is not limited to these number of people, it spreads out to society, and this like larger lawlessness in the society is just generally bad for everyone. So yes, there are multiple other angles that you can talk about when it comes to judging or like just seeing how an argument plays out in the debate. I would say there are generally, so I would just note it down. I think there are like 6 ways you can actually see an argument. It's called the pestle analysis. Does anyone know what pestle means? I'm sure you guys must have heard of this in your schools or something. No? No one? Okay. So pestle, the first is, yes, Arjun.
Yeah. So, pestle is basically it's like a strategy to analyze the political, social, technological, economic, and I forget legal impact of a more of like a law or policy.
What was second E? Sorry.
Like the economic, social, uh
Economic, social,
illegal,
political, technological.
technological,
Yes.
legal impact of a policy
Okay,
or
L is legal.
to
What's this E?
econo
Sorry?
environmental. That's environmental.
Yes. Yes,
Forgetting
very
that
good.
one.
Yeah. So yeah, so you see there are 6 ways to, or 6 lenses through which you can see a particular argument, a particular impact in the debate, right? So surely the motion can be economics, but the motion can have like implications beyond economics, which means it can have political implications, social implications, or even things are legal implications. So like I think the most commonly tied are these three, right? These are the most three commonly tied. There are some motions that will talk about even environmental. So looking like things like that government should prioritize economic growth over environmental degradation or environment protection, which means that then you also involve things like environment or even things like legality. Those things can also unlock as a consequence of how you see a particular argument. The way to go about this, or to use this in debates, is that you first talk about the economic impacts, because motion is probably economics, right? So you talk about the economic impact. Then in order to add more nuanced impacting to that particular idea, you have to see that this also causes, you have to say things like this also causes social impact or social implications like ABC, or this also has like, I don't know, political impacts like ABC. And now you can also go ahead and have an additional level of impacting, additional layer of impacting, and you can use that to also weigh your arguments. So yes, it's very important to diversify those things, because it also makes you a little more airtight towards the other side's claims on saying that economics doesn't matter, maybe other things matter more. So yeah, you should preemptively do this. Definitely, it's a very good question and a very good point to raise. That it's important to see pestle as well. I hope this is clear to everyone. Okay, I'm assuming that's a yes. Now let's get to like just case lines, and like just to explain how the case lines are going to function. Like case like we did, the first three steps were to identify the economic model that the motion falls under. Second was to identify stakeholders. The third was to identify trade-offs within the debate that you have to go about. The next thing we're going to talk about is what. So let's get into a little more detail about this, right? So let's talk about state intervention first, because I think that's going to be a most common way economics debates are going to function. State intervention. So I think the first broad idea that talks about state intervention, or like is the way these debates are going to be function, is that why should the states intervene? This is like an important burden that most teams have to fulfill, or why should states intervene in this particular manner? Because if you say UBI, the other side can say that we will build schools and hospitals. So the burden falls on you to explain why the state should intervene first. And if they should intervene on both sides, then why should they intervene in this particular way that we're discussing, as opposed to some other way that the other side is going to discuss? So it's important to fulfill this burden. Let's discuss more about this. But before I go on, yes, you have a question, Ian.
Yes, sir. Can you just repeat the like format of a case? The first was economic model, and second like that.
Yeah, it's right here. The first is
Okay.
economic model. The second is identifying stakeholders. The third is identifying the trade-offs that will
Trade-offs.
make in the
Okay.
debate. Yeah, yeah. Jehansh, you have a question?
Yes, so the you had asked why should the state intervene? So the
Yeah.
state has money, it can create opportunities, and it has like power to do something in the country or state.
Yes. So, what is the genesis of this power? The genesis of this power is people themselves, right? That people elect the state. In most democracies, people elect the state. This means that you have like a state power principle or social contract that you have with the state, right? Where the state goes ahead and gives you resources or interferes when it sees that you are not doing as well, and they have to ensure that you reach a bare minimum level. And in return, people go and either first vote the state into power, give the state its power to make policies for them, which means they devolve power to the state. The second is that people follow the state's policy, and follow things like rules of law, and like not create things like violence, stay in a regulated setup within the state to ensure that the state's harmony and growth is something that's sustained over time. So yes, there's a direct contract that exists between the state and people, and that means states have we can say the moral obligation to go ahead and help the people in a manner, right? So I think most teams are going to, on either sides, are going to agree that states have a moral obligation to interfere. The way you do this in debating, however, is to just explain that there's a big problem that needs solution. Uh, the reason why I say this is that if you do not first, as say prime minister or like as side government, if you do not frame how big the problem is, then it's easy for the other side to say that, oh, this problem can get automatically solved because of multiple other you know actors that exist. So you can have things like FDI that automatically come in, or private companies can do it, or people can just move out of the country, go to some other country and do get things like economic opportunities. So the question now becomes about why this problem is large enough and cannot be solved with current apparatus, current state methods, and why you need this particular solution to solve this. Which means when you're talking about a motion like this house will implement universal basic income, it's important for side government to characterize the need for this particular policy, which means that you have to talk about how the rates of unemployment are too high. Also talk about how the rates of poverty are too high, which means that if you just say that, oh no, some people don't have jobs, they don't have money, opposition can just say that, sure, but they have a lot of MNCs that are coming up in developing nations, they are growing, and they will eventually hire these people anyway, so you don't need this UBI. So if they displace the need that you have in the debate, which is like the first point of case building, right? We discuss the problem you want to solve. If they're able to displace this, then it doesn't matter how good you do the solution, how good you do the mechanisms, and how good you do impacting and weighing. You'll automatically lose because the need metric has been dissolved from the debate. So it's important to ensure that you're solidified the need metric in the round, which is quite crucial for your cases, like your case to have legs in the first place, right? So you have to explain why the problem is big enough that it needs solution. That will force that opposition to either think of a counter solution to this particular problem, or think of like any additional policy that they want to go ahead and implement. Or secondly, they'll have to explain why, or they have to spend again a significant amount of time explaining why the problem is not as big. But even I think in most cases they will not be able to do that. They will rather agree that the problem is big. So what they'll try to do is that they'll try to say that why this particular solution creates more harm than it causes benefit. So it's better to just leave the solution problem as it is, as opposed to making it worse using side government's policy. That's the three ways side opposition can engage with your case, right? So it's important to like ensure that you are pushing them in a corner, pushing the other side in a corner when it comes to engagement. You don't want to let them get away by just saying the problem is not as big. Yes, Ayan, you have a question?
How do we plan for POIs in our case?
You can't plan for POIs. POIs are usually factored around your case itself, which means people are going to ask you POIs that are going to try to draw out a concession from you, or try to give you some random analogy that, oh, if you agree with this, then you also agree with that, right? So they'll try to do those kind of things, which means it's important to. I think you can't prepare for POIs in case prep, but you can just be more prepared when it comes to thinking like at that moment. It's like, so thinking on your feet at that moment. Because when someone says that, do you agree that states should tax people 100% of their money, uh, the obvious answer is no, right? To that people should have some money. Then the question they say that if you don't agree with 100% taxation, why do you agree with say 20% taxation at all? So this is like a what about, right? That this is not a great POI. But if you say that no, we don't agree with any taxation at all, then you basically conceded your case that why do you even need 20%? So that becomes an issue, and you have to be very clear that we want people to give some portion of their amount based on what level of like social hierarchy or like resource hierarchy they are in, which means the rich pay more taxes, the poor pay lesser taxes. We're okay with that because it creates an effect of redistribution of resources, as opposed to taking 100% money away from someone. Because if you take 100% money away from someone, they will just not work at all. Right now, they still have a huge incentive to work, even if you're taking away 20%. So your response has to have a nuance in the way you approach that POI, especially when they're trying to draw out a concession from you. So you can't prepare for them, but you have to sometimes just think on your feet quickly and use your case to integrate your answer in the POI or the response to the POI. Yes, Samir.
Can we ask POIs that specifically point out a contradiction by stating their argument? Like you said this and you said that. Don't those two ideas contradict?
Yes. That's actually very common. A lot of debaters, a lot of people I've seen use this, and that's because you do have a lot of contradictions in some cases. So yes, it's very important to go ahead and specify this that this is a contradiction. How to resolve it? It's important for you to do this also because it helps the judge see that contradiction. Maybe the judge missed the contradiction themselves, but if you are able to highlight it to the judge, then they keep a track of this going on
Okay,
while they're
thank you.
judging. Right?
And also, how long are we allowed to ask a POI for? Can't be more than like
15
10 seconds.
seconds. 15
15 seconds.
seconds.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah. In traditional formats, it's just 15 seconds of POI time. But yeah, I think you're digressing a bit with the POI stuff. So we're going to get to those things later. Let's talk about state intervention. Why should state intervene in this particular manner? What's the second thing that we can talk about in state intervention? Why do you think do you think there's anything else about state intervention that that usually complete the idea of state intervention? Yes, Ayan.
I just had a thought. What?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The thought was that to answer your question, no, I don't think it's an answer.
Okay. So the next thing in state intervention is that why does state intervention uh, happen in a good way or in the way that you want it to happen? There are now here comes the additional mechanism that we're talking about, which are beyond like just economics as a whole. So obviously states have obligation to interfere, and they have obligation to interfere in this manner. That's what something we already explained. But why will this implementation happen in a good way, right? So for this you have to explain how things like politics works, like why do states do certain kinds of actions, and that will determine how the states will implement this policy. So there is political angle here, which talks about how states need a lot of voters, which means that if they want UBI to be successful, they'll ensure that the larger percentage of the population which is poor gets enough money, and the state does not engage in things like corruption at that point. Which means if you engage in corruption, you will not get the money to these people, which means these people are not going to give you their votes, right? So you want to ensure this happens in a good way. The second thing is just things like international legitimacy, where states are also looked upon by other actors, outside actors, right? So IMF, World Bank, even other countries like the US or Western liberal democracies or bigger, larger actors in the country, in the world, they go and see how your state is performing, because they also have a vested interest in how your state performs. Like obviously the capacity of the individual increases, then they can sell their products much more, which means imports, exports increase and trade increases. GDP growth, if GDP grows, it trickles down to everyone. So obviously there's national legitimacy associated. There are things like media and press and also people who, so this is not just like economics, this is also media and press, right? So you want to ensure that you have a good reputation when it comes to how the world perceives a particular country. The third is precedence, which means if the state have had a history of interfering in this way or a particular way, then they're likely to go ahead and continue those things in the future. So what do I mean by this? Like before 1990s, when the liberalization of India happened, India was a protectionist economy, right? We were focusing on improving our primary and secondary sectors, which was like farming and manufacturing. Initially farming, then manufacturing over time. But after 1990s, we realized that we can't sustain ourselves. The demand is not as much, and the kind of innovation or money that we need from outside is going to unlock our economy to a very good extent, because we have a lot of potential. We just don't have the capacity to build it, which means that we liberalized our economy. We allowed foreign money to come in. We allowed FDI to come in. What this means is that India has shown a pattern of not being protectionist, but rather showing that we are open to business with other countries. So you have precedents of those of that thing happening, and that means that this goes on and creating itself in the future, right? So we can say that India will allow more FDI to happen in the future. Now we have a different approach to FDI under the current government. We see that the current government saying make in India, right? Which means that you should come to India even if you want to invest, make the stuff in India as opposed to importing stuff to India, right? Because when you make things in India, it becomes cheaper for the consumer, Indian consumer, but also creates additional jobs, because now you have a factory that you have to set up, and you have to like get your supply chains and everything, which also helps build local economies as a consequence. So we have the same concept of FDI, but in a different sort of clothing, which says that you now want to make in India. So there's precedence for India doing this, and that's why you're going to do this. That's why like things like FDI can happen. So there's a motion about like should India open up its borders. So there was a motion that I recently did was about like should India increase the number of SEZs that they have, or should they aggressively pursue a special economic zones. Special economic zones are those areas which have like specially dedicated areas by the government, which have lesser taxes, which have like easier regulations, and companies can set up in those areas and they can get benefited from those regulations, and there's those lack of regulations. So yes, this is something that India has tried in the past, and that means that India will likely do this in the future as well. So you can use precedents also as a reason for why state intervention happens in a good way. I hope that's clear to everyone. If you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, cool. If state intervention is done, then we now look like then when we go into okay, let's get into market based, right? Okay, market based solutions. Okay, what do you think is the most important thing when it comes to market based solutions? Like, what's the one factor that changes all decision making for everyone in the market specifically? Yes, I am.
Priorities of the companies.
Which is?
to make more money, and therefore they won't do it in the best interest of the people.
Perfect. So profit becomes the key motivating factor for all decisions, right? No company wants to stay in a loss. If companies want to stay in a loss, then they already have some long-term game planned if they want to stay in a loss. So if you have heard, if you read the news, a lot of startups initially are not profitable. They don't actually make a lot of money. They don't. They actually are leaking money of the investors that they have had, but they still managed to be very successful. So Zomato for the longest time did was not profitable. Even Uber was not profitable for a very long time. But why are these still very big names? What do you think is the reason for why they are still okay running a losing ship? Anyone? Yes, Arjun.
Cause even though they weren't making a lot of profit, they were making a lot of revenue. They had,
Okay,
yeah,
explain that.
uh, if they had spent a certain amount of money, they would have, they had to spend a lot of money to be big names in the market, to be a daily part of people's lives, and they made back just about, or usually a little bit less than the money they spent.
Okay, so they had revenue, they did not have profit. But why are they spending so much if they don't are not earning anything, right? Because at the end of the day, everyone wants something. So why are they spending so much? Yes, Shri.
You just look at lots of long term profits, especially when it comes to investing. So, a lot of venture capitalists don't expect immediate returns, but rather long term returns. And also, just like the rise of COVID-19 has just made people like order a lot more when it comes to like delivery to home. So, that would have been like a massive revenue stream for them.
So they want future profits, right? They want future in long term. They'll increase their profits. Uh, how do you think that works? One of the good things that you just mentioned was that COVID-19 increased amount of deliveries that Zomato gets, which means that they can plan to the future. But we don't have COVID-19 forever. So what is the real mechanism through which they are actually earning here? Yes, Jihansh.
So maybe they want to put themselves up and like get prepared for when opportunity comes. Like when COVID-19 happened, Amazon and everything was ready for home delivery, or like when people wanted to order, they cannot start up at that time. They were already in the market. That's why they quickly got prepared to start home delivery when people wanted it.
Yes, that is called the first mover's advantage. Um, because you have already set it up. Very good, Jihansh. That's you already set up the production lines, you already have the supply chain in place, and you just need to capitalize on it. The second thing is actually the only reason they'll take losses is that if they want to increase the MCAP, which is the market capitalization, which means the amount of people using your product or service. Why do you think companies want to do this? Why do they want to increase the amount of people who buy and use your service? So the obvious answer to this is that they want more money, right? But they're losing money because they're spending more than earning per consumer. So what do you think is the long-term approach when it comes to uh, creating like a larger capitalization of the market? Yes, Ayan.
Okay, so I'm gonna take Uber as an example here. So
Sorry.
What Uber did is
Hmm.
that they took losses, but they capitalized the market, and now has everybody dependent on them, both the rideshare workers and the people looking for the rideshare, right? So now what they're able to do is just screw everybody by after for a long time taking losses and capitalizing the market and making it theirs, maximizing profits.
Perfect. Exactly. So this was about building customer loyalty and dependency. Because once they have pushed, so what was the largest competition that Uber had initially, right? Uber had the competition of these people who owned medallions, people or the private the taxis that were there in like in the US, right? So the yellow cabs that we see. once they were able to push those players out of the market, once they were able to break those lobbies, what they were able to do is that they were able to capture the entire market as a whole, which means that people had to rely on Uber a lot, even if the Uber was losing money at that moment. But once they realized, or once the competition was finally pushed out, and they almost had a monopoly in a way over this particular industry, then they increase their prices over time. This is exactly what we see with Zomato and Swiggy right now, right? Initially, they were offering deep discounts to people because this became an alternative for people to like order directly from the restaurant, or restaurants to have their own delivery riders sending deliveries to homes. But once restaurants like realized that this is not as profitable anymore because people are not just not buying from directly from the restaurants, they're using Swiggy, Zomato. These restaurants, they basically laid off all the employees who were just delivery agents, right? So they laid off the people who used to do deliveries earlier. And now, since the market is completely for Swiggy and Zomato, they are charging exorbitant prices in terms of delivery costs, or just doing increasing things like handling charges or those kind of things. There's hidden costs that exist within the amount you pay. So effectively, you might just be paying much more than what you should be paying for that same particular item that you would have ordered from the restaurant directly, right? But since the dependency has become so much that there's no way for this particular item or this pizza to get delivered to your home, you are reliant on them, and you will pay them maybe say 40-50 bucks or 40-50 rupees more than what it's actually costing at the restaurant. But you're okay doing that because it just gives you convenience. That convenience has been built into you by the dependency that these apps created for you, and not something that you have wanted yourself. Like you it was fine earlier, but they made you dependent, and now they're exploiting that dependency. That's how this model works, right? So even if you want to go in losses, you have a long term game you want to play as a company, and that's why you're okay taking losses. Even though the most common decision making metric for any company is that the amount of money they make, so they never want to go in losses. So you should always realize this in debating, that everyone says that everyone's profit motivated, but some companies are not profit motivated. They are playing the long term game, so they're okay with some short term losses as well. Yes, Srirada, you have a question.
Yeah, so I think another reason, probably not in a service sector business like Uber or Zomato, but rather in manufacturing, is also just economies of scale, right? Once you have the entire monopoly, if your cost of production goes down, no other actor within the market can scale costs down to your level, which allows you to uniquely, maintain the monopoly for a lot of years.
Yeah, that's economies of scale is one thing, but I think the correct definition, what you're saying is conceptually right. The term for this is actually vertical integration. Vertical integration means that you buy a lot of the companies that you are depend on, or you depend on, like down the chain or up the chain, right? So you might be a company that is just into, say, for example, coffee. I don't know, you're into, like, say, coffee, as you're a coffee maker, and you process coffee beans that you get from some farm in, like, in Africa or South America. You process those coffee beans, you package it, and you sell it to, like, Starbucks, for example. But if Starbucks decides now that they need to control the entire supply chain, they directly can tie up with farmers, right? They can directly tie up with those farmers. They can control the standards of production there. They can put those farmers on a salary. They can buy up their lands. They can also buy the middle company which processes the coffee beans or grinds the coffee beans. And they can also buy the advertisement companies that are marketing companies that basically market the coffee. So now Starbucks can control the entire supply chain. And once that happens, like, now they can reduce the costs massively because they can cross subsidize these products, right? So Starbucks can sell coffee at their stores as well, but they can also have just the beans sold separately instead of just selling selling the, like, the made up coffee as a whole, right? So they can cross subsidize these things. They can earn a profit in some of the companies that they own, and even if they take losses in other companies, they're okay doing that because they want to capture larger market share. So vertical integration allows companies to cross subsidize. It also reduces costs massively, and this also means that you push out any new competition, because if a new company comes up, they don't have in, like, as much insane capital to buy up, like, the entire supply chain. So they probably will enter one of the areas of supply chain. They'll either do, like, production or the processing or the final retail. If they enter in the retail business, they can't price as well as Starbucks can price, because now they are just like one step. So they are dependent on the cost that their suppliers incur or like push onto them, right? So the supplier's cost is very high, then you obviously cannot price your coffee very low. You have to price it quite high as well to make up for the kind of cost that you're incurring. What this means that you can't compete with startup anymore with Starbucks anymore, and they are basically then this basically becomes like an essentially a monopoly in the market. So vertical integration, based on the capacity that these companies have, increases the amount of control that they have within the particular market. And economies of scale, on the other hand, is just like, so economy of scale is essentially that when you produce a lot of goods at the same time, or like the same good like over like in a large quantity, the cost per good that you have to incur reduces. So if I'm making like two cups of coffee, it's going to cost me like say 50 rupees as Starbucks. But if I make the same cup of coffee, like 200 cups of coffee, then it costs me like 2 or 5 rupees per cup of coffee, because I have a supply chain already in place, and right, which means that the machine has to just do the same task again, as opposed to like increasing the amount of cost as a whole. So it's just cheaper when it comes to economies of scale. So that's what economies of scale means. You produce the same thing in a large quantity, and that reduces quantity that reduces cost per unit, and that improves your profits. Yes, Jahansh.
So you said that they come in first, the companies come in first into the market, and they get their hands onto the produce chain to push out new competitors. So in
Yeah.
the case of Zomato and Swiggy, how did Zepto, Blinkit, or VFast enter the market and become quite big?
So right now, so Blinkit is Zomato, right? Blinkit is a Zomato subsidiary. They have the same parent. It's not a new competitor. But when it comes to Zepto or say Big Basket, they are not as popular as Blinkit is or Instamart, Swiggy Instamart is, right? Because they came to the market quite early. Surely Zepto can now go ahead and reduce the amount of prices they have, or prices they or the charges that they take for per delivery, and that can put them in competition. But it's difficult to dislodge the entire competition that Zomato, that Blinkit and Instamart have created. The reason why I say this is something that's different from the example that I just used about, like say, Starbucks and the coffee that they produce, is because the goods that like they are selling, that Instamart sells or Blinkit sells or Zepto sells, they don't own those goods. They don't produce those goods on their own, right? So Zepto sells you like, I don't know, Diet Coke or Maggie or like chips, for example, or chocolates, for example. They are not producing those chocolates themselves. So they're not vertically integrated. Vertical integration means that you control all steps of the supply chain, not just one particular step. So right now, there's a fight between Blinkit and Instamart and Zepto based on the amount of discounts they can offer to people, so that people just become reliant on them. So now there are three big players in the market. But this is very different from vertical integration, which talks about you taking over the supply chain, which means if Zepto is producing its own Coke or their own chocolates or their own like chips, for example, then that would be a vertically integrated supply chain, which means they're not reliant on any additional actor. Right now, all these three companies are service-based companies. They are not product-based companies. So they only sell the products that other companies manufacture from their own godowns, right? So that's very different from what I was trying to explain here. But yes, you are right in a way that they're able to compete, but that competition is just on one sector, which is the last mile delivery of these products, as opposed to like the entire supply chain competing with each other. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So yeah, that's market-based solutions where you have profits for all decisions and you have future planning that you need to do. That's how market-based usually ends up working. These companies like raise capital or raise money through loans, through VCs, and even through like private funding, which is like uh, these are not loans from banks but from other actors that you end up taking as a company. So they can raise the capital to go ahead and implement all the solutions. Most of these market-based solutions end up, or market-based companies that are open in the free market, end up doing things like price competition, where they want to undercut each other, um, and they also do innovation competition, where they want to like one up each other, right? So So there are two benefits that usually free market brings along with it. One is price competition, the other is innovation. When private actors increase, that companies also are then taxed, which is the corporate tax that they pay to governments, and governments can then use this money for things like welfare, etc. They can also governments usually give a lot of cheap land to these companies. They give subsidies, which are manufacturing subsidies, tax subsidies, electricity subsidies. So there are a bunch of subsidies that governments give to call in more FDI. That's exactly what I was mentioning earlier. This is called special economic zones. When governments bring these people on board, and now they pay the government back in terms of funding and welfare. Most of these companies are quite essential to the economy. Why? Because they give employment. Basically, they become the complement supplementary, like, sort of employment creation for the government, which means that governments don't have to take the expenditure of creating that employment for them, for these people, which means that these companies go ahead and do things like employment. You have so many people engaged in MNCs right now. They also do things like training. So they train people on certain softwares. They have on-the-job training. They train people in skills like English speaking, or just like learning how accounting works, or whatever level of corporation you are in. You do end up learning about that job. So when you learn about that industry as a whole, um, what you do end up having is that you end up having cross applicable skills. These skills can be used in other companies that you now work in, and they can also help not just other companies but also the government. So if someone goes from private sector to public sector, they can bring the skills that they have learned in a private corporation and get it to the government sector. So that's how training is. They are essential to the economy. They don't just give tax; they also do employment, and like I said, they also do innovation, which is very important for most countries and most governments, because innovation is what creates. Yeah, write it down. Innovation is what creates things like accessibility, um, and technology is just used to important for GDP growth. Okay. Yeah, that's mostly it. So you have understood how private corporations work, what are the incentives they have, what are the benefits they bring along. You have also understood how state intervention works, what do states want, and how they make certain kind of policies. Both these actors work in conjunction with each other to ensure that people end up growing, or the stakeholder that's most important, which is that people get things like trickle down. Trickle down also happens through a lot of these things that we talked about. So when governments get more money through corporate tax, they can create more welfare. That's a direct way, very easy way to prove things that trickle down happens. So yeah, that's mostly it for how to approach case construction. If you have any questions, let me know. We'll get into drills after this. But I hope conceptually you guys have understood how to construct certain case lines when it comes to economics motions. We're going to discuss some motions which will help you even like more solidify this conceptual thing that you have learned. Any questions on the concept first? Anyone? Yes, Jan.
Sir, so when we are writing a case, first of all, so what is the difference exactly between a case and a speech?
So yeah, the speech is just the just the flowery way of presentation of the case itself, right? Like I can give you like okay, my mind is on coffee right now. So I can give you like just like the tools that required to make coffee. I can give you coffee beans, I can give you a grinder, I can give you a coffee machine, I can give you milk. And that's the case, right? So I've given you all the elements you need. But in order for you to make like the perfect cup of coffee, put it in a nice glass, make presentation, write your name on the cup, those kind of things are what make a speech. So case is just the elements you require to go ahead and make a good speech. But the speech has additional things that you need to add to this, which is the flavoring you need to add, which means things like right pauses, right rhetoric, right structure in where you start your speech, how you end your speech, what's the first line you'd say, what the last line you say. So right examples that you use. Those are things that make a good speech. But the case is like the backbone, without which you can't have a good speech.
So how can we, so do you have any tips basically of formatting a case into a speech? Like how to
I
prepare
think
it
that,
and then
yeah,
format it?
the easiest way to do this is follow this structure. Like I said, first start with the problem statement. As a first speaker, you should first start problem statement, then give solution, then do mechanisms impacting me. So follow this blueprint in a way. But there are obviously additional things like I just mentioned. There are things like examples that you can use. Always use relevant examples that like an average person will know. Don't use very niche or very specific example that only you or some people know of. Use generic examples. Second is using the right kind of pacing in your speech. You should not be too fast. You should emphasize on certain things, like make the right pauses. Sometimes people do things like humor also in their speech just to create like this like more comfortable effect. That's also good. I think those are things that you probably will learn over time as in when you give more speeches. But yeah, I think I've said this multiple times that speech or like debating is not just like a game of technicality, right? It's also a game of persuasion, which is quite subjective to individuals. So different people get persuaded by different things, and psychologically, controlling the room is much more important than having a very solid case. Sometimes you don't have a solid case, but just the rhetoric can be so strong that you can just win on the one client case that you have. So speech is the case is the important backbone, but it's not everything. It's what you do in the speech that matters. So yeah, I think those elements are something that you can incorporate over time. Some people who are great at theater and all. They do very well in debating because they know how to modulate their voices, and they know how to when to pause and what to say. So those kind of things also make a lot of have a lot factor into a lot of the ways the speeches are evaluated or the persuasion works.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, Janj.
Yes, so I have a few questions. So the case line, do we have to say the case line in the start to put out a structure, or is the case line for us to refer during our prep time?
It's for you to refer during your prep time. This is how you should write your case. This is how you should function or structure your case in your head. That's it. You don't have to say that I'll give you the problem first, then I'll give you a solution next. No. You just say this is the problem that you're facing, this is a solution. The reason why this works is APC, that's the mechanism. When it works, this does ABC, which is impacting. Why it's important, ABC, why it's more important. That's it. It's just for your reference.
And I also had a question. Can you give like the your debate in the start, and then in the second speaker can give like a powerful speech or something? Does that happen sometimes?
Yes, it does happen sometimes. I think it's that depends on what your team's composition is and what the strengths are. Some people are great at building like very flowery speeches and very persuasive rhetoric heavy speeches. Some people are more technical in their approach. They like to do like A, B, C. They want to give 3 points for every reason. They'll have like there are 3 reasons why this works. There are 4 impacts that we draw. There are 2 parts of weighing. So they like to do it most in a more structured technical way, almost like a science project. And some people are artists who want to just all the room in a good way. So yeah, I think it's just about leveraging your strengths and your teammates' strengths. So you should know what your teammates' strengths are. If they are great at building these flowery speeches, they can probably go first. They can build a flowery speech there. If you're more technical, you can go second. Sometimes people are great at engagement and rebuttal. Some people are not. So if they're not great at engagement, you don't want to send them later. You want to send them up top. If someone else is great at engagement, you want to send them like at the second half of the debate, because engagement matters a lot when it comes to especially second and third speakers. So you have to strategize that according to your team. You should know who your teammates are. You should know how they operate and what their mentality is when it comes to debating. That will help you iron these things out over time. Okay, let's get into some motions that we can think of. So I have a bunch of motions. Um, I'll just like you guys can just let me know what are the trade-offs you see. Where do you think this motion fits? Just like talking about the generic case line. Don't just give me impacts that if we do this then this happens. Don't do that. Impacts are quite going to be quite intuitive. The question I have is, or the exercise is to make you understand how the case line gets structured and what should be our approach when building this particular case, right? So, okay, let's talk about this house will ban cryptocurrencies. Yeah. Anyone? How will you approach this motion? What's the case line you think you should pick? Where do you think it fits? What are the kind of impacts you want to draw out of it? We discussed pestle as well here. So what are the kind of lenses you want to see this motion from? Side government, opposition doesn't matter. You can just pick whatever you feel like. Yes, I am. Go ahead.
Okay, so first of all, I think this should be a market-based one to limit the market, not directly government involvement, because it's just limiting the market, not directly involving the government. Um, then it would not have a really big political impact because cryptocurrencies isn't very big thing in India. It won't slow economic growth. Rather, what it'll just do is stop people from getting scammed by cryptocurrencies. That also applies as a social thing. Technological, it may slow down technological advancement of blockchains in India, but blockchains aren't really going anywhere. Environmental, it's good because blockchain processes take up a lot of water and then emit a lot of heat, and take up a lot of electricity that are really bad for the environment.
Okay, that's good. But you mentioned that this is just market based. Do you not think this is also state intervention because state is banning something?
Not really, because state intervention with the state directly putting its finger on line, like adding a tax and redistributing money, or like I'm going for a more narrow approach to what the definition of state intervention is, because
I
state
understand.
intervention otherwise has an extremely broad approach. It's anything the state does is state intervention if it's not
Yeah,
cutting back
yeah.
on something.
Yeah, no, but it's important for in ban motion specifically to explain why state intervention is good. The reason why I say this is because a ban is a very high threshold. Saying things like state will regulate this is not a high threshold. States regulate everything, and you're right, it's a very broad idea of what state intervention means. But when it comes to banning something, states only ban things that cause a massive harm or like are going to be very detrimental for the economic growth of the society. Only then you ban. So states ban drugs, right? But do they ban cigarettes? No, they don't ban cigarettes. They say that cigarettes are bad, but they don't ban them outright, or they don't ban alcohol. But drugs they have banned because they feel that drugs are uniquely cause a larger harm, or the harm is so massive that it outweighs any possible arguments of autonomy or people choosing what they want to put inside their body and stuff like that. So the ban usually mandates you to go ahead and give a reason for why the ban itself is good and why regulation can't happen. The reason why I say this is because in a motion that talks about ban, if you're side government, if you say that we'll ban X, side opposition will say that instead of banning X, we'll just regulate X. And then you don't know what to do as government, as team government, and you do not know how to beat the idea of regulation. And this is where state intervention has to be explained for you to explain why this is the ban is the only way you solve this problem as opposed to trying to regulate. And in order for you to run that, why is the only way to solve this problem, you have to explain the genesis of this or thesis of this has to be that state has to interfere in this way, and state has to interfere before that. So that's why in this kind of motions, it's important to explain why state intervention is required. Because opposition might just say we'll just regulate cryptocurrencies, we'll ensure that people are not mining all day, or like we'll cap the amount of mining a person or company can do. We can also ensure that we have a ledger that's maintained. That regulation will solve for everything like funding for criminals and stuff like that that cryptocurrencies usually are involved in, and that solves a lot of problems that side government wants to solve. So you don't want to get into that trap, and that's why intervention is required here. Someone else has their hand raised. No? Anything else on this motion? Is it just about states choosing to interfere? That's it? Yes, I am.
Sir, cryptocurrency is a very volatile and risky market and can cause and can often be susceptible to hacking or scamming.
Yeah, that's great. That's actually very good. So you can talk about how this creates things like security issues for people, how people's digital footprint and what they buy and stuff can go out there if states get a ledger. Usually, right now, you states like cryptocurrencies rely on things like anonymity, right? Like you can't know uh, who has used this for what. And that's a harm as well, because if you do not know why people are using their money for, then it can go for things like terrorism funding or criminal activities that you don't want people to go ahead and do. And that's why banning cryptocurrencies is also required. So yes, like that's a great impact to say that it's important to keep a track of these things. What else? Anything in terms of trade-offs? What are the trade-offs that people can think of? Yes.
Not a trade-off specifically, but on case line, I suppose you could, sorry, I suppose you could also just talk about how more vulnerable nations, like for example, which have weak fiat currencies, like domestically, can go ahead and use cryptocurrency. I think this happens in El Salvador and one more nation, which I am forgetting from the top of my head. I think Venezuela, I'm not sure.
Yep. Yeah, precisely. So stability is very important. Yes, cryptocurrencies can be highly volatile. They're dependent on market demand and market supply. If you so the reason why cryptocurrencies are priced so highly, some of them is because the supply is too less, right? Because you have to mine the crypto, the blockchain, and you need to have big servers to go and do that, and that's why it costs a lot right now. But it's mostly a bubble. Sometimes it can burst, and suddenly the prices of these things can come crashing down because it's not real fiat currency. It's not backed by anything. It's just like a software, and it's which has no real value. Because earlier in the days, money was backed by gold, and now it's just backed by like the trade deficits and surplus that people have. But now it's those things can change over time because they're not fixed in value. Yes, sir.
Sir, I think one why you could say that banning is required over regulation, because the entire point of cryptos is to be deregulated, and is against the nature of cryptocurrencies to be regulated. And therefore, the only solution is ban, because any regulation you do put forward will either A, stop the cryptocurrency's usefulness, or B, people will just go past them and find a way around.
Yep.
Then you could also say that
Exactly.
cryptocurrencies are bad for the economy because they undercut the rupee, okay, and that they're bad for people because they're so extremely volatile, and that C, they're just a bubble waiting to burst.
Yes, very good. That's precisely true. So that's why regulation cannot happen. Great. No one has identified any trade-off in this debate at all. There are no trade-offs. Cryptocurrency is just bad. There's no possible benefit to cryptocurrency. There's no trade-off that people want to make. Yes, I am.
So I think what we would have to trade off is the fact that some people like cryptocurrencies, and there are some things that can only be done like NFTs through cryptocurrencies. So we may be trading off the small artist pool of online artists who want to sell NFTs. But I don't think that's a very big thing because NFTs rely on cryptocurrencies, but it's not that big in India.
Yep. Okay. Anything else?
Maybe you would also be giving up the fact that people just don't like to be regulated and they just prefer deregulation in some cases.
Precisely. Yes, true. People don't want governments to track everything that they do. But there's also another thing, right? That
And the media might just pounce on it, like you know,
Yeah.
this the government banning cryptocurrencies, the media will just pounce on it, like, oh, it'll suddenly make what is not such a big deal a massive deal, and that will make the government look bad.
Yep. Also, currently, right, there are a lot of people who can't access traditional banking systems, and cryptocurrencies become the easy way for them to take loans from this system. So, I think it's important for things like accessibility as well, accessibility of currency, accessibility of money, of loaning, because currently look back, traditional banks will ask you to give things like collateral that most people do not have, and that's why cryptocurrencies are also great for the crypto market is great for things like accessibility to financial resources. So the trade-off here then becomes about accessibility versus like so bad things that crypto brings along with it that most of you talked about in terms of instability that happens or financial deregulation that means that people can do things like crimes and fund crimes and stuff like that. So all those things are the harm. That's the trade-off you have to make. So what you can say, yes, Ayan, you go ahead first.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but
No worries, no worries.
I think you're not exactly completely correct on the accessibility part, because the very people who won't be able to access regular banking institutions will also be hit the most hard by cryptocurrency's volatility.
Yeah, but if the cryptocurrency is not as volatile, then these people are to get benefited, right? If a lot of people start adopting it, the volatility reduces massively because the volatility depends on demand and supply. But if the demand increases massively, then it will just go up in price. It will not go down. The demand has to be overturned, or people have to see that this has no value for the for the demand to fall down, thereby reducing the prices. Bitcoin was very unstable when it came out, but it has been very relatively stable in the past 1 year, and that is because that is because demand has increased over time. Countries have started adopting it and stuff like that. Plus, like, you don't necessarily need like decentralized cryptocurrencies, right? A lot of governments are also discussing starting their own cryptocurrency. Even India is discussing starting its own cryptocurrency. So when it's centralized cryptocurrency, then the fluctuations won't be as bad because they'll be now pegged to the Indian rupee or to some currency, which means that it's not going to go up and down like crazy that current cryptocurrencies do. So yes, you are right that yeah, yes, you are right that maybe it's unstable, but it's not. Yeah, it's like it's not true that it's like everything is just completely unstable all the time. It can be stable as well. Yes, yeah, you're right. That's one of the most important ways that you prove accessibility. Okay, cool. So that's one motion done. Let's talk about one more motion before we wrap this workshop up. We'll say that this house believes that India should adopt protectionist policies. Yes, I am.
Okay, so I think one, this would definitely market. This would definitely be uh, government intervention, and maybe depending on what you're posing, it could also be a redistribution.
Tough to say redistribution, but market and state definitely.
Yes,
But okay, first, like, can someone explain to me what protectionist policies are very briefly?
I could.
Yeah. Well,
So protectionist policies would be policies that protect Indian businesses versus global businesses, and B policy that protect consumers over companies. I think that would be
okay.
the two forms of protectionist policies, like protecting the market from private going crazy.
Yeah. So it's not protecting the market from private going crazy, it's rather protecting the market from foreign competition. So you shut off things like FDI, you reduce dependency on foreign actors. So you produce and you consume locally much more than you send out or bring in. So that's the large protection policies. But yeah, what do you think is the approach to case line construction? Shreya, you had your hand raised. Do you want to answer?
Yeah, on Gov, obviously it's just growth of domestic industries and why that's something that is net good for the country. And then you can also bring in some framing on like how Trump tariffs, etc., affect global supply chain. So it's incredibly important and urgent for you to go ahead and adopt these sorts of protectionist policies. On OP, I suppose you could just talk about how supply chains are incredibly important to like go ahead and prevent things like conflict, which is obviously in the interest of any nation as a whole. I think you do have some amount of fiat to go ahead and back this up, but the simple thing is just that mutual dependency is inherently like a deterrent because you can always go ahead and threaten to like reduce trade or stop trade or etc., which is still something that's pretty good because no country wants like inherent conflict, at least in the geographical area that they're situated in, because that leads to lots of losses, things like capital flight, etc.
Yeah, that's actually very solid. Great job. This is exactly what I was looking for. The framing has to be that the Trump tariffs have forced countries to adopt these measures. That's a very strong framing because that proves that that there's a need is massive right now. That's exactly what I'm talking about. They have to explain why the problem statement is as big as debaters want them to be argued and viewed. Um, I forgot what fiat means. Shreya, do you want to explain what fiat means?
Basically, just your ability to guarantee something. At least you can't guarantee that it's done in a good way, but you could at least create like a baseline that it is done.
Yeah, fiat just means that the policy that you want to push as a government or opposition in a debate will be passed by the sorry, not the constitution, the parliament. So the policy will be passed. If you say that this house will ban smoking, you will ban smoking. Maybe people will find a way around it. But it won't be like the ban will not be passed by the parliament. We can't make a policy around it. So those kind of things are not into. So yeah, effectiveness of the ban, used utilization, good or bad, it's still up for debate. Great. I think Shreya covered both parts of this debate actually. So this motion is mostly done. But if someone wants to add anything to this, please feel free. Someone who has not spoken up until now. Is there anyone who has not spoken up until now? Shaurya? Okay. Shaurya is not here. Arjun? Oh, your mic is glitching. No worries. Arjun, are you there? Okay. All right, all right. Then anyone, Ayan, Jahansh, you guys want to add anything to this? Yes, go ahead.
Maybe you could say that I know this is very fringe and kind of very emotional idea. But we could say that we'll put return tariffs to show that Trump that we're not just going to back down from him, and that if he's going to put up tariff walls, we're going to do the same, and that India's you're not going to just mess with India like it's a little pawn that you can move around.
Okay, that's okay, but that's not a part of the protectionist policies directly, right? It's more of a like a social or like not a social but a political pushback against what Trump is trying to do. But this motion is not obsessing about what India should do in response to Trump. The Trump framing helps you weigh up or prove that the problem is big. This problem is this. The solution is not to solve exactly for that. That's a part of the problem, not the entirety of the problem. Yes, Jihansh.
Also, that would really obstruct the trade of India if you put tariffs on America and then America is putting tariffs on us, then all the trade of us and America would kind of halt or be troubled or a little slow down the trade.
Yep. That's good. That's good. So exactly, this motion is, like I said, not just about how we respond to Trump tariffs, but Trump tariffs, the framing that you use in the debate helps you explain why the problem is large enough, but it's not the entirety of the problem. So that's a good point. Yes, Shreya.
Also, I suppose you can extend Indian domestic industry getting bigger by also just talking about how Trump's current situation with a lot of immigrants is to go ahead and actively try and revoke their um visas and stuff. So the H-1B situation in America right now, even though the American government did issue a clarification later on, the general line of thought is just that they want immigrants to go back, at which point you're going to have a massive labor surplus within India as a whole, which is going to be pretty bad because lots of unemployment is obviously economically bad for a country because then you have to put in that much welfare, especially if you're a country that has this many people but still somewhat lower revenues compared to other countries. At that point of time, it's incredibly important that you go ahead and generate those domestic jobs because otherwise you're going to have to spend a lot on money which has opportunity costs of going into things like infrastructure development, especially in rural areas, for example.
Yep. That's actually very solid. So employment is a huge factor in this motion. It's one of the most important impacts in this motion. There are other things that I want to discuss about this motion, but we'll let Ayan and Jehansh first go. So Ayan, go ahead.
So actually, this is kind of almost building off what Radha said. So could a protectionist policy be a policy that prevents Indians from seeking work abroad to foster more to decrease brain drain and foster more people just like inside India, to foster growth in AI tech startups because there's just now more tech people just hanging around India?
Yeah, I don't think it's very easily possible. I don't think it's even legal that you can just stop people from moving out of the country. I think if it's freedom of movement that people still have, so you can disincentivize them. You can say that we will not fund. So you can do things like bonded labor that a lot of countries do. That if you work that if you got your education in a particular country, you have to work there for the next 3 or 5 years before you are allowed to move out. You can also do things like prevent things like remittances from happening so that this creates an actual disincentive for them to go. You can also talk about how You can also just you can do positive incentives as well. You can increase the amount of money these people or jobs that are available to these individuals, which means that they don't feel the need to go and stuff like that. So you can do those things, but I don't think you just like completely outright ban them from going outside. So yes, Janj.
Yes, I also agree. I was trying to say the same thing. That along with keeping them in India, you should also develop opportunities for them to work in India, so that because people go out in search of opportunity, but if you make the opportunity in India, then they will stay in the country.
Yes, yes, precisely. So there are other things that I want to just quickly share about this motion before we wrap up. The first thing in this motion is that side government will also have to explain how you will get the funding to go from like a FDI dependent economy to a protectionist economy. So you will need additional resources to supplement, actually to make up for the kind of loss of money that comes from FDI, right? That has been coming from FDI. So to answer that question, side government will have to explain why you will be able to take debt from things like IMF or World Bank. And you can then, or like even the Asian Development Bank, there are a lot of areas from where a country can take debt or build the capacity. You can increase taxation, you can increase the corporate tax that you take from people, the income tax that you take for regular individuals. You can ask for things like, you can issue things like government bonds to go ahead and get more money in. That's the most common way governments raise funding. So you have to explain how governments get money to go ahead and implement such a policy in the first place. I think you guys talked very like smartly about the kind of impacting that we can do in the round in terms of employment creation or like just competition and protectionism. But it's also important to explain why you get the capacity to build it. That's logically prior to that particular argument. The second thing I want to talk about is what happens when you reach those impacts that you guys want to talk about. So when you reach those impacts, you can talk about things like resilience of the market. What this means is that if we have things like COVID-19 in the future, when supply chains around the world are hurt and countries just want to go ahead and they look out for themselves as opposed to looking out for others, in those instances, it's important to build things like self-reliance. If you're a protectionist economy, then you're producing and consuming within the same economic like circle. What this means is that you're not dependent on additional or foreign actors. So in case in the future economic downturn happens or things like black swan events like COVID-19 happens again, then in those cases you are not reliant on other people, which means you can still sustain your economy without taking like a massive hit. So for example, there are a lot of countries that are dependent on like external revenue, or it's like mostly export or import, right? Even things like tourism, for example, like if you think about a tourist destination, say for example Indonesia, right? So Bali, for example, Bali is dependent completely on tourism. In COVID-19, the economy just shut down completely because they had nothing going on besides that, right? Because they were dependent on external people coming in. So being protectionist means that you ensure that the demand and supply is met within the economy, within the same like the borders of your country. When you do that, you become more reliant, and you can explain why reliance is good over long term. So in the short term, you may face harms of you not getting enough money from foreign companies because you have to go close on economy to them. But in the long term, you build reliance, and then you explain why reliance matters more than the short term benefit. That's how you also make a trade off in this debate. I hope that's clear to everyone. Okay, I'm assuming that to be a yes. All right, cool. That wraps up this session and this workshop. Thank you so much for attending, whoever attended. I know we had a small audience, but you guys were very engaging. It was lovely to engage with you all. If you have any questions, like parting questions, please feel free to let me know. If not, thank you so much. And yeah, good luck for your debating journeys.
Thank you.
Yep, no
Thank you,
worries.
sir.
Thank
All
you,
right,
sir. Bye. I was
all
there
right.
when you asked me the question. I just forgot to answer.
No worries. It's completely fine, Arjun. Good luck.